This is a story about the man who has control over 40% of all websites. A story about the war between two multi-billion-dollar companies. A story about the crossroads at which the concept of open source might currently find itself. This is a story about, and I never thought I'd make a video about this, WordPress. Because WordPress isn't exactly what I immediately associate with modern web development, enterprise programming, a PHP blog software. If you know, you know. But something happened in the WordPress community, a wild story, so it's definitely worth taking a closer look. And to be honest, at first I thought I'd just read 2 or 3 articles on the topic and summarize them in a video, easy. But in the end I read over 20 news articles, countless blog posts, waded through pages of legal documents, watched hours of interviews with the people involved, read leaked chat messages, basically researched tons of information from various sources. Because this is truly an incredible story about money, software and the internet, one that will likely be remembered as a milestone in the history of open source. And that's the story I want to share with you here. So grab some popcorn, a coffee or a tea and sit back, let's get started. Let's first take a look at the key players in the story. At the center is a man who is now 40 years old, named Matt Mullenweg. Matt, a web developer, created a fork of the blogging software B2K in 2003 at the age of 19 after its development had been discontinued. Matt wrote about this in his blog at the time. He was able to create a fork because B2K was GPL licensed. This license allows for the free modification and redistribution of software even for commercial purposes, provided that any software derived from it is also GPL licensed. It's one of the most well-known and widely used license families in the free and open source world. And this project that Matt Mullenweg started back in 2003 together with another person, you've probably guessed it by now, this became WordPress. Matt is therefore one of the co-founders of WordPress, and to this day, more than 20 years later, he is still actively involved in the open source project. But he also owns a company, Automattic Inc. This software company owns platforms like Tumblr, but primarily makes money through services related to WordPress. We'll get to that later. WordPress. What is WordPress? Well, even my wife, who knows nothing about software development, is familiar with the term. Still, for the sake of completeness, WordPress started as a blogging software and has evolved into a fully fledged CMS. It's written in PHP and has developed a massive ecosystem of plugins, themes, hosting providers, and a huge community around it. WordPress became so successful that by 2023, over 43% of the top 10 million websites in the world were built with WordPress. Mind-blowing. This makes WordPress the most important CMS we have, a PHP-based blogging software that today forms the backbone of the internet. And WordPress remains under the GPL license, meaning the codebase is freely usable, modifiable, and can be used to create commercial projects. And WordPress is indeed commercially used by many companies. One of those companies is WP Engine. WP Engine is a US-based hosting provider, but it hosts only one software, WordPress. That's why it's called WP Engine, with WP standing for WordPress, a fact that will become very important later. Founded in 2010, WP Engine serves over 150 million customers, including large enterprises. Their pitch: build, host and manage websites powered by WordPress. It's a smart move. If you're already planning to create a WordPress site, you might choose this provider over a traditional host and benefit from features like automatic updates, tailored tools, scalability, expert support, and optimized performance. All designed specifically for WordPress. But all that comes with a price. Plans start at $25 per month, which is quite steep. Prices may vary globally, but in Europe you can usually get web hosting for significantly less. And this pricing is already kind of part of the dispute, part of the WordPress drama. WP Engine makes a lot of money off WordPress. They've been so successful that in early 2018, private equity firm Silver Lake invested $250 million in the company. Silver Lake is a US-based private equity firm focused on tech investments. A bit of research into Silver Lake shows that many of their investments are strongly driven by profit maximization. For example, in 2010 they invested in the open source software company Talent, which develops data management systems and pushed aggressive growth strategies. In 2017, they acquired shares in Unity, the famous game engine. And a few years later, Unity came under heavy criticism for a sudden and significant price increase for its services. A scandal in the community that ultimately led to Unity's CEO stepping down. It raises the question, how much influence did Silver Lake have on these business decisions? And in Germany, Silver Lake is also infamous for acquiring and dismantling Software AG, once the second largest software provider in the country. They sold off individual business units to maximize profits. So, Silver Lake, like many private equity firms, focuses heavily on profit maximization. And in 2018, they entered WP Engine, a company whose business model is built on an open source blogging platform, WordPress. Now one could argue, fine, open source allows for commercial use, and many others make money this way. Even WordPress co-founder Matt Mullenweg does so with his own company, Automattic. Automattic is the company founded by Matt. The two T's in the name, there are not two Matt. Automattic makes the majority of its revenue, around half, according to Matt in an interview, from WordPress, particularly through hosting services. But they also profit from other products. For example, WooCommerce, the most popular e-commerce system for WordPress, is developed by Automattic. And Automattic is certainly no small company. Back in 2021, it was valued at 7.5 billion, a major player in the industry. So the key players in this drama are Matt Mullenweg, the father of the open source WordPress project, his company Automattic, which uses WordPress as its core business, and WP Engine, a competitor of Automattic. And now the question is, what happened? At the end of September, Matt Mullenweg published a blog post on WordPress.org that caused quite a stir. But before diving into the content of the post, let's clarify, what is WordPress.org? WordPress.org is essentially the official website for WordPress, the open source project. It's the site referenced in Wikipedia entries and serves as the central hub for everything related to WordPress. And according to an interview with Matt, this domain is personally owned and managed by him. This detail feels important to the story because, in my view, it blurs the lines between the open source WordPress project and Matt as a private individual. For instance, at the bottom of WordPress.org, there's a link to ma.tt, Matt's personal blog that we saw earlier. And there's also a link to WordPress.com. And WordPress.com, on the other hand, is owned by Automattic. It's where Matt sells professional WordPress services. This creates a clear overlap of interests between the official website of the WordPress project and Matt's commercial endeavors. And it was on WordPress.org in the blog section that Matt published a rant on September 21st. It has to be said and repeated, WP Engine is not WordPress. My own mother was confused and thought WP Engine was an official thing. Their branding, marketing, advertising, and entire promise to customers is that they are giving you WordPress, but they're not. And they're profiting off of the confusion. WP Engine needs a trademark license to continue their business. I spoke yesterday at WordCamp about how Lee Whittlinger at Silver Lake, a private equity firm with 102 billion assets under management, can hollow out an open source community. To summarize, they do about $500 million in revenue on top of WordPress and contribute back 40 hours a week. Automattic is a similar size and contributes back 3,915 hours a week. So Silver Lake, as we discussed earlier, invested heavily in WP Engine. And now Matt says, okay, WP Engine makes a lot of money off WordPress but contributes very little to its development, only 40 hours per week. Another company, Automattic, his company, let's not forget, does a lot more, allegedly investing 100 times that amount. And at first glance, it's a morally valid argument. Companies can use WordPress, but it's problematic if they only take and don't give back. Assuming that's all true, WP Engine, for instance, claims they contribute significantly more overall. Still, one could argue Automattic sets a better example in this regard. What I find particularly interesting, though, is that Matt accuses WP Engine of giving the impression that they are WordPress. But from my perspective as an outsider, I find WordPress.com far more confusing than WP Engine. Before researching this story, I often stumble across WordPress.com and couldn't fully grasp whether it was official or not. And Matt raises this very point. WP Engine needs a trademark license. This debate centers on who is allowed to associate themselves with the WordPress name and who isn't. It turns out there is a way to acquire rights or licenses for the WordPress project, but who owns the WordPress trademark? A quick research reveals the trademark is owned by the WordPress Foundation. What is the WordPress Foundation? The WordPress Foundation is a charitable organization founded by Matt Mullenweg to further the mission of the WordPress open source project to democratize publishing through open source GPL software. Alright, so a foundation. Sounds good at first glance. It's an entity you can donate to if you want to support the open source WordPress project. They even offer a scholarship program. On their website, you'll also find the trademark policy, which states: the WordPress Foundation owns and oversees the trademarks for the names and logos of WordPress, as well as a few other WordPress-related brands. But it gets more interesting further down. If you would like to use the WordPress trademark commercially, please contact Automattic. They have the exclusive license. A bit complicated. Matt Mullenweg himself agrees, as he mentioned in a recent interview with TechCrunch. I will link to that below in the video description. Because originally the WordPress trademark belonged to Automattic, but in 2010 they transferred it to the WordPress Foundation. However, Automattic retained the exclusive license for commercial use. So this was a positive move in principle, Matt's company handling over a well-known trademark to a foundation. According to statements at the time, it was because Matt wasn't sure if he'd always remain the CEO of Automattic, and he wants the main banner WordPress to be protected as a beacon for open source freedom. But Automattic ensured they kept the exclusive right to commercially use the WordPress trademark. But what exactly does use the WordPress trademark commercially mean? According to the trademark policy, all other WordPress-related businesses or projects can use the WordPress name and logo to refer to and explain their services, but they cannot use them as part of a product, project, service, domain name, or company name, and they cannot use them in any way that suggests an affiliation with or endorsement by the WordPress Foundation or the WordPress open source project. For example, a consulting company can describe its business as 1 to 3 web services offering WordPress consulting for small businesses, but cannot call its business the WordPress Consulting Company. Okay, so it means you can make money with WordPress, but you're not supposed to officially present yourself as WordPress. So does WP Engine do that? Sure, WP is meant to stand for WordPress, but they don't actually use the full term WordPress in their name. But the trademark policy also mentions something about WP. The abbreviation WP is not covered by the WordPress trademarks, but please don't use it in a way that confuses people. For example, many people think WP Engine is WordPress Engine and officially associated with WordPress, which it's not. They have never once even donated to the WordPress Foundation despite making billions of revenue on top of WordPress. Okay, that's wild. They explicitly mention WP Engine here and state that it violates the rules because it's supposedly confusing. However, this wasn't always the case. As of September 24th, according to the Wayback Machine, it still said the abbreviation WP is not covered by the WordPress trademarks and you are free to use it in any way you see fit. Alright, so this is fascinating. Matt publicly calls out WP Engine on WordPress.org, urging them to pay licensing fees, and then, just a few days later, the trademark usage policy on the WordPress Foundation's website, which he co-founded and where he still sits on the board alongside 2 others, is updated to WP Engine's detriment. That all said, I want to clarify, I'm not a lawyer or a judge. WP Engine's public branding surely involves more than just their company name. Maybe they do violate the trademark usage policy, I don't know. I also can't determine the legality of changing such a policy and then expecting companies to pay up. What I can do is to lay out some facts which paint, in my view, a very intriguing picture of how Matt operates across the platforms he controls. So, on WordPress.org, he not only demands money from WP Engine for trademark violations, but also labels them as cancer to WordPress. And he repeatedly uses a strangely specific example, whether in interviews, blog posts, or elsewhere. Because WordPress has a feature for revisions, meaning all changes to posts or pages are tracked so that every modification remains accessible. It's a safeguard against data loss. And Matt says, WP Engine turns this off. So, at least by default, this feature is disabled on WP Engine, and while it can be re-enabled, it only allows for the last 3 revisions, which is not aligned with the WordPress standard. And he claims, what WP Engine gives you is not WordPress, it's something that they've chopped up, hacked, butchered to look like WordPress, but actually they're giving you a cheap knockoff and charging you more for it. And why? Allegedly to save money. Less data storage means lower costs. Sounds logical, I guess. But does it ruin WordPress for users? Well, That's debatable. Beyond this blog post, Matt also takes more concrete action. On September 23rd, his company Automattic sends a cease and desist letter to WP Engine through its lawyers, citing violations of our clients' intellectual property rights. They demand back payment of licensing fees, which can only be calculated after reviewing WP Engine's detailed financial records. However, Automattic estimates this could amount to around 8% of WP Engine's 400 million annual revenue, over 32 million in lost yearly licensing income. This is a hypothetical calculation, as Automattic itself acknowledges, but it gives you a sense of the scale they're aiming for. In short, they're asking for a lot of money, and they give WP Engine until the 3rd of October, 10 days to comply. WP Engine doesn't take that long to respond. They reply immediately, and unsurprisingly, they're not happy. They refuse to pay and state, Mr. Mullenweg's covert demand that WP Engine hands over tens of millions to his for-profit company Automattic while publicly masquerading as an altruistic protector of the WordPress community is disgraceful. And I want to be clear, I'm not here to take sides with Silver Lake, WP Engine, multi-billion-dollar companies or private equities, but this aspect is undeniably essential. On the one hand, this is a legal dispute between two companies. On the other, it's about a massive open source project, and Matt Mullenweg is undeniably a significant figure in the open source world. Whatever one thinks of WordPress, Matt has created something incredibly valuable for a lot of people, something anyone can use for free. And Matt says many things that are absolutely correct in my opinion. On his personal blog on September 17th, just days before the post on WordPress.org, he wrote extensively about the importance of open source, that software can give you more freedom. On September 20th at WordCamp US, a WordPress conference, he read this blog post aloud.
Freedom to hack, freedom to charge, freedom to break it, freedom to do things I disagree with, freedom to experiment, freedom to be yourself.
In it, he emphasizes the importance of not just taking, but also giving back. If everyone only seeks to profit without contributing to an open source project, it will ultimately collapse, and I completely agree with that. And of course, it's no coincidence that Matt gave this speech shortly before Automattic went public with their demand for money from WP Engine, and he doesn't hide his intentions either. Speaking of WP Engine, Silver Lake, and their managing director, Lee Whittlinger, he says,
Silver Lake doesn't give a dang about your open source ideals. You can kind of see when there's like one person, one thing behind all of this. And it's just like a schoolyard bully. You know, I know this is spicy, this is a lot to call out, but unfortunately this has been going on since they bought WP Engine in 2018.
A schoolyard bully who's using their influence over WP Engine solely to focus on profits while giving nothing back. And as Matt himself admits, this is a spicy topic. It's particularly spicy because before this talk, there were some chat messages Matt sent to representatives of WP Engine about the presentation he was preparing to give. I have 14 slides so far, working title for the talk, How Private Equity Can Hollow Out and Destroy Open Source Communities, a story in 4 parts. Matt kind of threatens WP Engine by stating that he will speak poorly of them publicly at WordCamp and demands negotiations. Just called. Should I run these slides or not? Is next week a negotiation on the percent, or is it happening at all? I'm not going to be able to walk it back. I know that this is the nuclear option. It sets us down a specific path. And right before the talk, he sends another thread to WP Engine. I'm literally waiting for them to finish the raffle so my talk can start. I can make it just a Q&A about WordPress very easily. So if WP Engine had caved and agreed to pay, Matt likely wouldn't have taken this issue public. As we know now, WP Engine didn't back down. By the way, these chat messages were published by WP Engine through a legal filing. Matt Mullenweg addressed these messages, at least partially, in the interview with TechCrunch. He confirmed certain phrases and didn't deny the messages overall, so we can reasonably assume the messages are authentic. But Matt points out that these messages are, of course, only half the story, taken out of context. No chat messages from WP Engine employees have been published. He also claims this is just the tip of the iceberg. According to him, Automattic and WP Engine had been working on a deal for 18 months. He feels strung along, deceived, and is now taking this route. WP Engine, unsurprisingly, sees things differently. They claim to invest millions in WordPress, develop plugins for it, and actively contribute to its core development. They demand that the public accusations stop and refer to the situation as extortion. So this legal letter was sent on September 23rd. The very next day, WordPress.org blocked WP Engine. So if you have installed WordPress, you've likely also installed plugins. WordPress.org provides automatic updates for these two end users, including WP Engine's customers, at least until September 24th. On that day, Matt abruptly blocked WP Engine's access. And this decision made waves, especially because it was seen as potentially putting sites at risk. Because the concern is clear, updates often address security vulnerabilities, and without them, users are at risk. However, it's also debatable whether WP Engine has a legal right to access WordPress.org in absence of contracts, payments, and other agreements. Regardless of who's in the right, Matt's move created tangible consequences. An interesting twist is that WP Engine developed a very popular WordPress plugin, Advanced Custom Fields, or ACF, designed to simplify content creation in WordPress. And this plugin isn't just used by WP Engine's customers, but by many other WordPress users as well. And it too was hosted on WordPress.org. This meant the customers of WP Engine, the plugin creators, could no longer receive updates for it. And since ACF is widely used and reportedly had a security vulnerability, Matt Mullenweg decided to fork the project himself, renaming it Secure Custom Fields. And he justified his actions by citing the WordPress plugin guidelines, specifically paragraph 18, which states he has the right to make changes to a plugin without developer consent in the interest of public safety. So Matt essentially hijacks a very popular plugin from WP Engine and decides to continue its development himself. It's kind of funny in a way. I mean, WP Engine leverages WordPress licensing terms to their advantage, so why shouldn't Matt use the plugin guidelines to his? As you've likely gathered from my comments in this video, this is a double-edged sword. Matt Mullenweg's actions are dividing the WordPress community. On Reddit, some have started discussing whether it's time to fork WordPress to escape this publicly aired conflict. Matt was once widely beloved within the community, but now there's a sense of uncertainty, both among individual contributors and companies. What exactly constitutes a trademark violation involving WordPress? What doesn't? What services are permissible to offer? It's unfortunate that there seems to be a blurring of lines between Matt, the open source visionary, and Matt, the businessman. In the end, his company is simply trying to secure a significant payout from another company. Against the backdrop of this conflict, Matt offered all Automattic employees an option. If they disagreed with the company's decisions, they could take a severance package of $30,000 or 6 months of salary, whichever is higher. Interestingly, 159 employees, about 8% of Automattic's workforce, took him up on the offer and resigned. Clearly, not everyone is on board with his actions. Even among WordCamps, those WordPress conferences, there's resistance. For example, WordCamp Sydney posted on X that they were instructed by official channels not to allow WP Engine as a sponsor. They expressed disappointment over this decision. And another now deleted tweet from them stated, they, WP Engine, have given so much to support the Aussie WP community over the past 10 years. It's not just about contributing dev back to core. In the open source world, there's a term, benevolent dictator for life. It refers to someone who, despite a large community contributing to a project, ultimately has the final say, allowing them to push things forward and defend the project's core values. And Matt can certainly be described this way. In fact, David Heinemeier Hansen, creator of the Ruby on Rails framework and a prominent figure in open source, referred to him as such in a blog post on October 13th. And David doesn't necessarily take Matt's side, but he does make a striking point. Using an open source project like WordPress as leverage in this contract dispute and weaponizing its plugin registry is an endangerment of an open source peace that has reigned decades with peacetime dividends for all. And he also says something that deeply resonates with me after researching the story. Please don't make me cheer for a private equity operator like Silver Lake, Matt. Yes, exactly. So now we wait for the courts to decide. And we already have an initial ruling. In early December, a California district court issued a preliminary injunction requiring WordPress.org to restore WP Engine's access to resources and plugins. The court sided with WP Engine, suggesting that Automattic's actions were harmful to their business. And it noted that Automattic targeted WP Engine specifically while ignoring other competitors. Automattic has announced its intention to appeal this decision. However, as mentioned, this is only a preliminary ruling. It remains in effect until a final judgment is reached, which could take years. All in all, I have very mixed feelings about this topic. Like most software developers, I benefit immensely from open source. Having someone with influence stand up publicly to defend open source against corporations is, in principle, a good thing. The future of open source is undeniably challenging. Major companies like Microsoft, Amazon, etc. also heavily rely on open source software. However, for example, through cloud usage, they often obscure the modifications they make to the software, making access to these changes difficult. But under licenses like GPL, this access should be guaranteed. Companies make billions from open source and benefit from it. And that's fine to some extent, but their projects themselves shouldn't suffer because of it. But at the same time, Matt clearly has financial interests. His company wants money from another company. A lot of money. 8% of revenue. No other company has to pay that much, as he openly admits in another interview, and he even threatens more. I put you a link to the interview and a lot of other sources I used in the video description. He's within his rights perhaps, but the various roles Matt plays, a private individual, co-founder of WordPress, board member of the WordPress Foundation and CEO of Automattic, start to blur. Furthermore, Matt once held shares in WP Engine, which he had to sell to Silver Lake. So it all leaves a bitter taste. Matt is undeniably leveraging his power, not just against WP Engine, but also in one of humanity's greatest ongoing debates. Recently, he added a checkbox to the login window on WordPress.org, which users must agree to before logging in. I'll cover this spicy topic in another video. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, whether on Pineapple on Pizza or the WordPress drama. Share your opinions in the comments. Let me know what you think about the story, and if you've enjoyed the video, I'd also greatly appreciate a like or a subscription. See you next time.